Hello, my name is Matthew Pfeiffer with MattPfeifferCoach.com. Welcome to my YouTube channel. On this channel, I create videos and content about toxic, narcissistically abusive relationships. If you have a question that you'd like for me to answer, make sure you send it to justaskmatt at MattPfeifferCoach.com. Again, that is justaskmatt at MattPfeifferCoach.com. Just make sure you keep that email 2 to 3 paragraphs max, and you're also very direct and to the point of what your question actually is. If it's too long, if it's too lengthy, unfortunately, I will not be able to answer it. Also, make sure you hit the subscribe notification and also the bell notification so you're notified each and every time I upload a new video. And if you would like for my help personally, if you need a little bit more assistance with something that you're going through, you can always join the YouTube membership. And we have a lot of different courses. We have a lot of different things that are available, a lot of different options for you to meet with me as well, all with it wrapped up within the membership, depending on which tier you choose. With all that being said, let's get into today's video. Today's video comes from a person who feels like they might be dealing with a covert narcissist. And if you know anything about covert narcissism, it shows up a little bit differently than someone who is dealing with an overt narcissist, right? The overt narcissist is what people call the classic narcissist, right? The person who wants to be the center of attention, and the person who is very loud and outgoing and can be obnoxious. And a covert narcissist has a very different presentation. They might actually come across as very quiet and very timid, so to speak. Right. So let's get into this email. Let's break this down and let's discuss covert narcissism. So this email reads, hey, Matt, I'm having a hard time at this point in my marriage. I think my husband is a covert narcissist, but some things don't add up. And this is something that is very true of covert narcissism. A lot of times people will listen to different content from other creators and from coaches, and they're reading the books to try to help understand and trying to get a grasp on what narcissism looks and sounds like. But with covert narcissism, a lot of times it doesn't add up to the classic narcissist like I was talking about. And so a lot of times you might say to yourself, this person hits on a lot of these points, but not everything. This seems a little bit off, a little bit awkward. So let's get back into this. I think my husband is a covert narcissist, but some things don't add up. So I'm not sure. I know I have a lot of work to do. And at the time when we got married, I was at a very low point in my life, and he was the only one that showed me interest or seemed to care. My father is a narcissist. So we have the father who's a narcissist, right? And so when we have narcissists in the background, we know that we have the tendency to be attracted and to gravitate towards narcissism as well. And so the other thing I wanted to point out is the fact that this person starts to question themselves. That's another sign that I typically look for. That happens with anyone who might be with a narcissist, but it is especially true when we're talking about someone who is a covert narcissist. We're going to talk about the reasons why here in a second. So I've experienced abuse on every level through my life, and my mother seemed to just let it happen, even after the sexual abuse. Around the same time I got married, I had already confronted my parents and told them how I felt. After the marriage, his mask came off. And one of the things I want to say, this is true of all narcissists, is that a lot of times you'll see their mask, or you'll hear people say that I saw them for who they really were. Once we got married, once we got engaged, once we moved in together, once we had kids. And you'll hear people say things like, as soon as that happened, I saw a completely different version of them. That part is actually not true. It might feel like it's true, right? And they may completely change or shift once those things happen, and they might just completely let their mask off because they now realize that they have you locked in. However, one of the things that I talk to people about that I work with is that quite often you saw a lot of signs early on, and we blew past those red flags because we didn't want to be the bad guy. We didn't want to speak up for ourselves. We didn't want to ruin something that was so good. And so there was a lot of elements. There was a lot of hints that this person was like this typically, right? But the reason why it seems like the mask falls off during these times is because they know that they have you locked in. Let's get back into this email. After the marriage, his mask came off. The laziness was horrible, and it was more of a 1920s wife cooks and cleans and caters to the husband, and he does nothing but take out the garbage. now I bought my own house and have been raising my daughter on my own. Her father is is also a narcissist. I went no contact and very independent before we got married. He brought nothing to the table, and the man I thought he was, who he gave me previews, was a lie. So one of the things that we want to point out is that this is exactly what I was talking about, right? One of the things that this person says, right, and I'm not getting on you, is that the person brought nothing to the table, right? But then we say that the mask completely fell off whenever they got married, and that this person was lazy, this person didn't do anything, the only thing that they wanted to do was take out the garbage, right? So we have some elements that we saw this coming up. And the reason why I'm saying this is not to get on anyone, not to victim shame or anything like that, but we do have to victim empower. We do have to begin to take and learn from the lessons and learn from the mistakes. Because if we don't, what happens is that now all of a sudden we're going to fear that every single relationship that we get into in the future is going to be narcissistic. So if we don't begin to empower, if we don't take the wisdom and the lessons from the mistakes that we have made, right, then all of a sudden it's going to be a struggle for us to move our life forward. So let's get back into this. My husband did switch religions as well, and this is something that's also very true of covert narcissism, is that they do tend to be very, very spiritual, very, very religious. I'm going to talk about the reasons why here in a second. So to everyone, he's sweet and loving and caring and supportive, but behind closed doors, he's emotionally and mentally abusive. And this is very, very indicative of covert narcissism. So one of the things that we have to understand about covert narcissist versus an overt or the classic narcissist is that quite often the classic narcissist, they rub people the wrong way. They get on people's fucking nerves, to be quite blunt about it, right? So some people might love the overt narcissist. You see them coming a mile away. They love being the center of attention. With a covert narcissist, people tend to love them, right? People who are on the outside, people who they work with, people who you go to church with, love the covert narcissist. And that becomes very problematic for the person who is their victim, because you think and you internalize that as if the only person who has a problem with them is you, but you're actually the only person who is actually seeing them for who they actually are. So let's get back into this. I've recorded conversations to make sure I'm not crazy. I started to feel like I was the narcissist. This is also very indicative of covert narcissism. The victim starts to internalize and starts to think that they're the problem. A lot of it because there's no physical abuse, or oftentimes, I don't want to make it seem like covert narcissists are not or cannot be physically abusive, but typically they're not, right? Oftentimes they're not. Most of the time it's more mental and emotional abuse. People describe it as death by 1,000 cuts, where it's just a constant, and them constantly shifting blame. And a lot of the issue that happens with covert narcissists is a lot of times they just drop seeds of doubt with you and with people who are around you. So it's not just you. So they might come to you and say, "What's wrong with you? You're just a little bit off. You seem down. You seem depressed, even though you're perfectly fine." And so at first you're like, no big deal, right? This person, they're welcome to their own opinion, but then they say the same thing to your mom, your dad, to your friends who are around you. And they might say something like, "Can you check on them? Just, something's just a little bit off," and will literally echo that same exact thing. So then you go hang out with your friends, you go hang out with your family, or you go to work, and they say the same exact thing, right? And you don't even realize that this came from the covert narcissist, right? So your friends and your family, "What's wrong with you? You just seem like a little bit off. We're just concerned about you, just a little bit, just a little bit concerned," right? And so then now you really start to think that there's something wrong, and you start to wonder, right? And this is part of the gaslighting, and this is how a covert narcissist will begin a smear campaign, right? Is that they'll just consistently drop seeds of doubt with people who are around you, right? And what happens is that because you don't see them actually doing it the way that an overt narcissist would do, right? Oftentimes you will internalize that as though there's a problem with you. Let's get back into this email. So this email reads, he doesn't do the typical things a narcissist does, like, "My daughter's father was the worst. I don't see the same things in my husband, and I'm confused at this point. One of the books that I would highly recommend for you to read is called The Covert Passive Aggressive Narcissist, and it's going to bring a lot of understanding to your situation. We have to begin to shift this from learning about narcissism in general and being more specific to covert narcissists, because it does present a little bit differently, right? They still have the grandiosity, they still have a lot of different things, but the way they present it is very different because of the shift. And if you haven't healed from the first one, if you didn't have understanding of the first narcissist from your child's father or even from your father, right? The likelihood, a lot of times people want to go into the opposite direction. So you are with an overt narcissist, and then all of a sudden you're thinking to yourself, I want someone that's a little bit more quiet, a little bit more down, and then you end up with a covert narcissist. I don't engage with him in conversation anymore. He knows all about my past, and I feel he put me back through the same things all over again. His favorite line is that wasn't my intent, right? And this that covert narcissists do, right? Especially because they typically have a squeaky clean image with everyone else. Oh, that wasn't my intent. I would never do anything like that, especially when they have an audience, right? They will try to keep that squeaky clean image. And also there's a lot of projection when it comes to a covert narcissist, and a lot of gaslighting, to make it seem like there's something wrong with you. And God forbid, right, if there's any level of reactive abuse on your end, right, and I'm not blaming you, right? Everyone has their limits. But if you get to a point where you pop and you snap and you say things that are outside of your character, you do things that are outside of your character, right, then a covert narcissist is going to pounce on that and is going to use that and make you feel even more like you are responsible for everything that's happening. The use of his favorite line is that it wasn't my intent. The use of word salad and manipulation is sickening at this point. Not sure what I should do, as my religious beliefs are important in keeping me in this marriage, but I'm trying to learn how to deal with it. Any advice? I'm also in therapy, but I need to switch therapists. So some of the things that I would say is that quite often, so going back to one of the things that I mentioned earlier, you mentioned that he switched religions, and he switched spirituality. And quite often, narcissists will do this and be a part of the manipulation. That they will use the spirituality, whatever spiritual background that you're in. They'll use scripture, as a way to justify their bad behavior. But one of the things I tell people and I challenge people to do is that quite often you're not getting the full scope, the full spectrum of the way that you actually should be treated within your spirituality and within your background. So I would challenge you to do more research and to step outside of the bubble. One of the things, so I'm going to kind of piggyback this with people who struggle with cults. So people who are in a cult, and when I say cults, don't think just people who are drinking Kool-Aid and all that kind of stuff and a lot of things that you see in the news. Cults could be in in the church that's right up the street, right? That looks normal to the average everyday person. But then once you're behind closed doors, what's actually happening with cults is that quite often they have a very charismatic leader, which is typically someone who's struggling with covert narcissism. And I work with a lot of people who are recovering from religious trauma. And a lot of times, just like you just mentioned, they're still very close to their spirituality. They still identify as a spiritual person with whatever spiritual background that they have. Now, with that being said, a lot of times those same people are still being manipulated, and the scriptures that they hold near and dear to their heart and the things that they find very important and value are also being used as tools and points of manipulation by that same covert person. So one of the things I challenge people to do is to step outside of that bubble, right? So not saying that you're involved in a cult, but there's probably some cult-like behavior coming from your husband. And so we have to step outside of the bubble, right? Start talking to people who are outside of your church. Am I saying to talk to people who don't have the same value? No, I'm telling you to talk to people who are outside of that bubble, who are outside of the church, who are outside, who doesn't know your husband, who doesn't know. And one of the things that happens, and this is what happens to people who struggle with cult, is that all of a sudden the blinders start coming off, right? That you start to realize that there's other ways to kind of look at these scriptures that's keeping you locked into this, right? And so those are some things that I would say here to begin to step outside the box, but also begin to learn a lot more about covert narcissism. Because as you begin to learn and research about narcissism, which is important for you to heal and for you to kind of go through your process, you're going to notice that covert narcissism, even though it's the same, there are some differences between that and overt narcissism. And it's going to help you be able to make a much more clear decision on what you want to do moving forward, on whether or not you want to stay or go. I wouldn't recommend you staying, because what's going to happen is that slowly over time, it's going to have there's a lot of detrimental effects that happen to people who stay in unhealthy relationships, including your physical body is going to start breaking down, a lot of autoimmune issues, hair loss, physical weight loss, weight gain, and not in a healthy way. And so those are some things that we really have to be very aware of. But I would begin to learn more about covert narcissism, and also I would begin to understand, step outside that box and talk to people who may share a similar background in terms of spirituality, but are not locked within, and a few people, and are not locked within the same church, or don't even know who your husband is. And also I would, just like you said, I would continue therapy. So thank you very much for writing in. Anyone else who has a question, make sure you send it to justaskmatt@mattpfeiffercoaching.com. Again, that is justaskmatt@mattpfeiffercoaching.com. Keep that email 2 to 3 paragraphs max. Be very direct and to the point of what your question actually is. If it's too long, if it's too lengthy, unfortunately, I will not be able to get to it. So with all that being said, thank you very much. Now we'll talk to you soon.